Hey guys, Will here. So as you can see, I've been very busy over the last couple of days. We're pretty much set up and ready to go now. I've just got to get everything plugged in and yeah, all the cable management done and things like that. I won't bore you with all the details of that in this video today. We're going to focus on the triple, or actually the quadruple monitor setup. So I'll take you through the assembly like I did with the P1X cockpit the other day, and we'll go through my first impressions of this all. And then in the next video, we'll go for our first drive. So let's just jump straight into it.
So as with the P1X cockpit, we have a bag with all of the bits and pieces that we're going to need, all of the hardware. So tipping it out on the ground now, we've got a couple of large corner brackets here which are used to mount the main cross member for the center monitor. We've got some little rubber feet, some corner brackets for the base, a separate bag full of all of the mounting hardware, so T-nuts and bolts. And as we had with the P1X cockpit, again, spring ball type T-nuts as well. We'll take you through those in a little bit more detail in a moment. We also have a couple of SimLab stickers as well. And all of our plastic end caps as well. So I purchased the optional mounting plates for my Benq monitors as well, but we'll show you those in more detail once we get to that part of the assembly as well. And then obviously all of our various different pieces of profile. So this is constructed of 4080 and 4040 profile. So there's the two 40-40 pieces that are making up the legs. And then onto our bracketry. So these are the mounting brackets for the side arms, for the side monitors. 5mm thick or 5.5mm thick, probably the thickness of the paint there being measured as well. We've got our VESA mounts as well. I will show you how to mount those too. We've got 4 mounting holes that just go straight into T-nuts, as well as our 200mm, 100mm, and various other mounting options as well. And then we also have the Quad Monitor Addon as well, and I'll take you through that in more detail later as well. And I forgot to show you before, the VESA mounting plates are also 5.5mm thick too. So having a close look at these T-nuts, what makes these unique is you're able to actually slot these into the profile at any position along the rail. So if you find that you need an additional T-nut that you forgot to put in, you don't have to pull everything apart again to slide it in from the end. You can just sort of pop it into position as shown here. So that's really useful. Now it also means that there's tension constantly on the T-nut as well. It's pushing it up against the profile, which stops it from cross-threading and things like that. So really useful there. So moving on to the assembly now, is start off by mounting our 4 rubber feet. This is all very self-explanatory, just like with the P1X cockpit. Pretty hard to get anything wrong here, but I will take you through in a bit more detail as we get to some of the more complex stuff. So mounting our 4 rubber feet here, 1 in each corner. And what I did was I pushed them right up against the end of the profile so there was no issues with measurement. And then we move on to mounting our uprights. So M8 bolts used for these, 4 corner brackets, 2 on each rail. Now we want to make sure we orient these correctly as well so that the bolts are sort of on the outside. You'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. We also want to make sure we're using the shorter bolts of the 2 options that are provided here as well. So you're going to find an adjustable set square incredibly useful for this entire assembly process. What I did here was I measured the distance to the rear mounting bracket on both sides to make sure that my spacing was exactly the same on both sides, and then fixed down my mounting brackets. So then onto the uprights. Again, you can see here why it's important to orient the T-nuts in the correct direction so that the 2 nuts don't interfere with each other when you're trying to tighten them up. So you build 2 of these exactly as shown here. And then onto our cross member. So the corner brackets that you're going to be using here have little tabs in them to allow them to be aligned without twisting. So what you'll need to do is use a screwdriver or something like that, pair of pliers, just to snap the tabs off on one side. So you want to snap off the 1 and the 2 on one side, leaving the ones on the other side in place to help with alignment. So insert our T-nuts again as shown. And then we can mount the bracket onto our uprights. So again, duplicate this on the opposite side. And then onto mounting the cross member. So again, 4 T-nuts on either side. And mount it into position. So again, we're going to want to measure the distance from the top on both sides to make sure that everything's square. And again, the orientation of the T-nuts is very important here to make sure that the bolts don't interfere with each other when you're tightening them down. So at this stage, we don't want to really torque things down. We just want to tighten them down enough that they don't move around and they stay rigid enough that it's not going to collapse on you while you're assembling. And then again, using our adjustable set square, we're going to measure the distance down to the cross member and make sure that that is exactly the same on both sides. So moving on to our side monitor brackets now, 2 on either side, so 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, and again using M8 bolts. So you're going to want to put 2 T-nuts on the top, 2 T-nuts on the bottom as well, mounted in position, again just loosely for now. And then we can slide our side monitor arm into position. Repeat the same on the other side as well. And you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So onto the Vaser mount now. So we're going to be using the 4 tapered screw holes in the middle of the plate with the screws provided. So again, we're going to insert 4 T-nuts. And then just screw the Vaser mount into position as shown. Now the width of the cross member is 1200 millimeters, making the center 600 millimeters, and the width of the Vaser bracket is 220 millimeters. So to line up our center, all we need to do is line up our 600 millimeter mark on the tape measure with our 110 millimeter mark on the set square. So as mentioned before, I'm not actually going to be using the Vaser mounts, I'm using the Benq monitor mounts. So these screw into the back of the monitor. I'll show you that in just a moment, and then mount to the cross member using M8 bolts provided as well. So mounting these to the monitor itself is very self-explanatory, but you just want to make sure you push these absolutely to the top so that there's no alignment issues. Obviously, if it's off center, then your monitors are going to be crooked later on. So taking a look at the assembly of the quad monitor mount now. So one thing that I need to mention here is that unfortunately the bag of mounting hardware that was meant to be included in the box wasn't included in my case. Now I was able to make up all the pieces that I needed to assemble this using all the parts left over from my P1X. Normally these would be black bolts though, so just be aware of that. I'm using the stainless bolts because that's all I had, but normally these would be black bolts. So again, pretty self-explanatory in terms of construction here. You can just watch through and see exactly how I'm doing this. Don't really need to talk you through the process. Again, just paying attention to the alignment of the T-nuts, keeping everything loose for now until we've got everything assembled, and then tightening it all down at the end. So to mount this onto our cross member, again, 2 T-nuts on either side, so 4 T-nuts in total. Now again, you only want to mount this loosely just for now. So to get this aligned, exactly the same process as what we did with the Vaser mount before. So you want to go to the 600 millimeter mark, which is your center line for the cross member, measure the width of the mounting plate. The monitor mount itself is 400 wide, so you want to take the 200 millimeter mark, line that up with the 600 millimeter mark on the cross member, and that will be your perfect center point. So what I did was use a T-nut to mark the exact center of the cross member, and then measure 200 millimeters out from either side to give me my measurements for my brackets. And then once you're happy with the position, you can tighten everything down. And of course, don't forget your plastic end caps either. So in my case, I am going to be using a VESA plate to mount my TV for my fourth monitor. So 14 nuts, exactly the same process as we showed you before. And again, you can use your set square to measure the exact center. And now it's time to get our height adjustment all exactly right before we add the weight of the monitors. It's pretty much impossible to adjust the height or anything once the monitors are mounted because there's just too much weight. So it's really important to do this now. So the way I did this was I used my set square to measure the distance from the mounting bracket to the bottom of my monitor. And then I matched that up with the distance that I want the bottom of the monitor to be from the ground based on the height of my rig. And then check with the spirit level to make sure everything's absolutely square. Now you also want to make sure the angle brackets are completely square and flush as well. So as we're showing here, used a couple of pieces of tape here just to line everything up and making sure that everything is at complete right angles. And again, making sure that the distance from the top is exactly the same on both sides as well, just to make sure everything is absolutely perfect. So with that all done, it was time to get the monitors mounted, just the two M8 bolts. Again, making sure you measure to the center, so you can use your adjustable set square to do that. And now you need to pay really close attention to measuring the distances for the side arms to make sure that your side monitors are aligned perfectly. Now this is really important. If you get this right from the onset, it's so much easier. So what I did was I measured from the end of the profile to the bolt and then replicated that exactly on the other side as well. So I knew that my mounting brackets were in exactly the same position on both sides. So once you're happy with that, lock them down into position. Make sure you tighten the bottom as well. And then I repeated the exact same process for my angles as well to make sure my angles were matched on both sides. So again, once you're happy, lock everything down. And then you can get the side monitors mounted. So if you get everything right, you can see here just how easy that was. With measuring everything beforehand, it lined up absolutely perfectly. There was no droop, no nothing. So with the triple monitors mounted, time to move on to the fourth monitor. So don't forget your plastic covers before you get this mounted. It's just a little bit easier to put them on before you mount the monitor. Grab a helper if you can to get the monitor mounted. This is going to be pretty much impossible with one person. So just screws it to position onto the VESA mount. So with that all done, now all is left to do is do any more fine-tuning adjustment to your heights. You can see here I've dropped the top monitor down just a little bit to line it up a little bit better and slide the cockpit into position.
So here we are, pretty much all set up. Obviously, we still need to do cable management. You can see a couple of cables tucked away underneath there already. I've sort of started to make a start on it. But yeah, look, everything went together remarkably easily once again. I mean, I wasn't really surprised by it this time because obviously after the experience of assembling the P1X, I kind of expected this to be roughly the same. I mean, it was a little bit more difficult, I think, than the P1X just to get everything aligned. The one big tip that I would give you is just make sure that you measure everything, particularly around this area here. Make sure you're measuring all the spacings with the set square like I showed you in the assembly part. Getting that right and taking your time to do all that from the onset makes a big difference later on. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in my final thoughts, but you definitely want to spend the time. You can see the power cord there for the TV up the top. You definitely want to spend the time getting everything right, measuring everything down to the millimeter before you start putting weight on it, because you will find that that's sort of one of the disadvantages of a rig like this is that, you know, once you add the weight to it, it's really difficult to adjust anything, particularly this corner bracket here. As soon as you loosen those bolts, if you got weight on it, it's just going to drop or tilt forward to try to sort of pivot immediately. And I had a couple of issues with alignment there. You can see it's pretty sturdy now, but well, very sturdy now. It's not really moving at all. But yeah, the first time I put everything together, the alignment was a little bit out on this side. It was tilting slightly forward, and the whole thing was sort of crab walking, and I had to remove everything off it again and have a second go at it. So it's just, that's partly just down to lack of experience as well. I'm sure those who have built something like this many times before wouldn't have a problem. But there's plenty of scale of adjustability here, or scope of adjustability, I should say. Obviously, you can move the side arms in and out. You've got about probably what looks like about maybe 20 degrees of adjustment there as well. And then obviously on the back here, these are different mounts from the ones that you'll likely be using. These are the BenQ mounts, but I showed you earlier in the video what the VESA mounts look like as well. So there's a lot of adjustability there. You can see I'm able to get it right up and close next to the wall here. My monitor just happens to sort of sit completely flush with the profile there as well. I haven't hammered these in quite yet, so that's the reason why there's a bit of a gap there. But yeah, look, again, the hardware is all very high quality, no issues at all. Looking down here as well, you can see we've got our corner brackets, and you know, it's exactly the same as the P1X really, so it all matches perfectly. But yeah, no problems with rigidity whatsoever. And yeah, I was really surprised at just how well the monitors lined up immediately. I didn't have to do any stuffing around at all to get these all lined up. And I'll just quickly show you with the spirit level as well. If we put our spirit level up on top here, absolutely dead center on the top monitor, and dead center on the side monitor. So yeah, I mean, it's lined up absolutely perfectly, which makes me very happy. Now, a couple of other things to quickly talk about as well, height adjustability. So you can see I've got the caster wheels on my P1X here, and I still have quite a lot of adjustment there. I can still move up about another 1.5 inches before I max out the height. Now, obviously, you could also use different brackets here as well. So the VESA mount would be a little bit different from the BenQ adapter plate. But depending on the size of the monitor could end up being a little bit lower. Now, I could have probably had my monitors set up a little bit lower than I have. If you sort of sit in the driver's position here, you can see it's a little bit raised. Now, the reason I've done that is because I am hoping to add a 4 degrees of freedom motion platform to the rig in the not too distant future. And that's obviously going to add a little bit of height to the rig as well. I probably will actually end up needing to raise the screens anyway, but that's the reason why I've done it that way for now. But yeah, there's plenty of height adjustment. Obviously, you could add longer profile if you needed to. You'd need to be a little bit careful about weight then. Now, I was a little bit worried using triple 35-inch screens that the weight would be extending a little bit too far forward past the leg there. You can see there's probably a good, probably 700 millimeters of extension in the monitor beyond the leg of the stand there. But I can push down on that with my hand. I mean, I'm not yanking at it, granted, but I can push down on that pretty hard, and there's absolutely no chance of that falling over whatsoever. That's not going to topple over, and that's kind of the one concern I had, was that it might be a little bit unstable with such large monitors mounted to it. But yeah, we've got our triple 35-inch curved monitors as well as a 32-inch panel up there as well, which I'm going to be using for streaming and reading comments and telemetry and things like that. And then obviously we've got our PC over here, which isn't hooked up to anything at the moment. And yeah, so let's get into our final thoughts now. So there you go, guys. Now, I was just impressed with the quality of the monitor stand as I was with the P1X cockpit. Really no surprises whatsoever to speak of there. Now, I think the key here with assembling this, as I mentioned throughout the video, is precision in the assembly when you're putting things together. If you don't take your time and measure everything right down to the millimeter as you're putting it together, you're going to be in for a world of hurt later on. You're going to have to pull everything apart multiple times, adjust things. And I mean, even with my assembly, I did have to take the monitors off again once and just sort of realign things because the legs were a little bit off center. It kind of sagged forward a little bit. But as you saw, when I took my time and measured everything, particularly with getting the monitors aligned itself, I was really quite amazed at just how easily that all went together. With the previous monitor stands that I've used, I've had to spend quite a bit of time sort of putting in shims and kind of jerry-rigging stuff just to get them to line up perfectly. In this case, once I had everything else bolted down correctly, the monitors just went straight into position. There was absolutely no time required at all in fine-tuning and adjusting to try and get the angles or the pitches right or anything like that. It just went straight together. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Leave a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it and found it useful. Make sure you're subbed and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss future videos. We'll be going for our first drive in the next video, so you'll definitely want to stick around for that. But thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.